Imagine it is a crisp, clear night, the kind of peaceful night that makes you feel small in the best possible way. The date is April 14th, 1912. You are standing on the deck of the largest, most luxurious moving object ever created by human hands. The rumble of the massive engines, 29 boilers burning through 600 tons of coal a day, is a constant, powerful hum beneath your feet. The air is bitingly cold, cold enough to steal your breath, but the sky above is an explosion of stars, so bright and so close you feel you could almost reach out and touch them. You are on the RMS Titanic, and you are, by every measure available to you at that moment, invincible. You are on a floating palace that the experts, the newspapers, the world has declared unsinkable. But look closer. Look just beyond that perfect horizon. There, lurking in the darkness, is a silent, jagged mountain of ice, black against the black water. In just a few moments, the invincible will meet the immovable, and the world will never be the same. Welcome. This is not just the story of a ship that sank. This is the untold story of the Titanic. The stories they left out of the history books, the whispers, the secrets, the why behind the tragedy that still haunts us over a century later. We all know the broad strokes, the iceberg, the lifeboats, the freezing water. But the real story of the Titanic is buried much deeper than the North Atlantic floor. It's a story of insane ambition, of mind-blowing coincidences, of cover-ups that started before the ship even finished its first day at sea, and of the secrets the dead took with them to their watery grave. We're about to go deep, deep beneath the waves and deep beneath the legend, because the truth about that night is far more shocking, far more human, and far more fascinating than anything you've seen in the movies. To truly understand the Titanic, you have to forget everything you think you know. Forget the romantic heroes and the simple villainy. The story begins not in the icy water, but in the fiery furnaces of a rivalry so fierce it nearly bankrupted nations. In the early 1900s, the Atlantic Ocean was a superhighway of ambition, and two companies were locked in a Cold War: the British Cunard Line and the British White Star Line. Cunard had just launched two superstars, the Lusitania and the Mauretania. They were fast, sleek, and dominated the seas. White Star, backed by the enormous financial muscle of the American financier J.P. Morgan, decided they couldn't win a speed race, so they decided to change the game entirely. They wouldn't build the fastest ships, they would build the biggest, the most opulent, the most awe-inspiring ships the world had ever seen. They would create a floating city of unimaginable luxury. This was the birth of the Olympic-class liners. 3 ships, the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. They were to be a statement, a declaration that human ambition knew no bounds. The Titanic alone was a marvel, 882 feet long, as high as a 17-story building. Its anchors weighed 15 tons. It took 20 horses just to haul the anchor around. This was not just a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's triumph over nature itself. And the men who built it were so confident they made a fatal mistake. They declared it practically unsinkable. They didn't say it publicly at first, that was the press, but the attitude permeated everything. The ship was designed with 16 watertight compartments. They could be sealed from the bridge electronically. The belief was that the ship could stay afloat even if 4 of these compartments were breached. Think about that. They had planned for disaster. They just couldn't conceive of a disaster big enough to beat their genius. This arrogance, this supreme confidence bled into every decision made about the ship. The most glaring example, the one that would haunt the world forever, were the lifeboats. The Titanic was designed to carry up to 64 lifeboats, but do you know how many she actually had on that maiden voyage? 20. Just 20. Why? Because the deck space was needed for promenades so first-class passengers could stroll and see the ocean. The lifeboats were seen as an eyesore, clutter. Besides, the ship was unsinkable. The boats were just for show, to ferry passengers to shore in the event of a minor emergency. They were, in the minds of the designers, a formality, not a necessity. That decision, that aesthetic choice, would directly lead to the deaths of over 1,500 people. The Titanic left Southampton on April 10, 1912. It was a spectacle. Crowds lined the docks, waving goodbye to the millionaires, the socialites, and the hundreds of hopeful immigrants in steerage, all chasing the American dream. Among the passengers was the richest man in the world, John Jacob Astor, and his pregnant young wife. There was Benjamin Guggenheim, the mining magnate. There was Isidore Straus, the owner of Macy's department store, and his wife, Ida. And there was the captain, Edward J. Smith, a beloved figure, known as the millionaire's captain, who was planning to retire after this, his final voyage. It was the voyage of a lifetime. Everything was perfect. The food was exquisite, the service impeccable, the company legendary. But almost immediately there were whispers, there were secrets, and the first one started even before the Titanic left the dock. There's a bizarre story, a rumor that was barely a footnote in the official inquiries, but it speaks volumes. As the Titanic was being tugged out of the Southampton harbor, the massive displacement of water she created caused a smaller ship, the SS City of New York, to snap its mooring lines and swing wildly towards the Titanic. A collision was avoided by mere feet. It was a bad omen, a sign of things to come. But in 1912, men of industry didn't believe in omens. But the real secret, the theory that conspiracy theorists have latched onto for a century, is far more sinister. It's the theory that the Titanic that sank wasn't the Titanic at all. Here's how the story goes. The Titanic's sister ship, the Olympic, was launched first. In 1911, the Olympic was in a serious collision with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The Olympic was badly damaged, and the blame was placed squarely on the Olympic. This was a financial disaster for the White Star Line. The repairs were massive and not fully covered by insurance. The ship sat idle, losing money. The company was in trouble. At the same time, the Titanic was nearing completion. The theory, as wild as it sounds, is that the White Star Line, in a desperate bid to save itself from bankruptcy, pulled the switch. They swapped the ships, they patched up the damaged Olympic, gave her a fresh coat of paint and some new fittings, and passed her off as the brand new Titanic. The plan was, according to the theory, to intentionally sink the old, damaged Olympic, masquerading as the Titanic, on a middle-of-the-night iceberg collision. They would collect the full insurance money on a new ship, get rid of a damaged liability, and no one would be the wiser. It sounds like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, right? And it probably is just that. But the theorists have their evidence. They point to photographs, comparing the construction of the two ships. They claim the window placements are different. They point to the fact that J.P. Morgan, the ship's owner, was supposed to be on the maiden voyage but canceled at the last minute. They point to the fact that many of the millionaires who died, like John Jacob Astor, were vocal opponents of Morgan's business empire. Historians have thoroughly debunked this theory. They've produced endless documentation showing the differences between the ships, including the recovery of the Titanic's actual hull piece, marked with her builder's number 401. The Olympic's number was 400. The evidence is solid. The Titanic is the Titanic. But the fact that this theory persists, that it has a strange, twisted logic to it, tells you everything you need to know about the world of 1912. It was a world of such immense corporate greed, such a casual disregard for human life in the pursuit of profit, that people can easily believe a company would sacrifice 1,500 souls for an insurance payout.
That suspicion, that dark cloud of distrust, is part of the untold story. So, we know it was the Titanic, the real Titanic. On the night of April 14th, she was barreling across the Atlantic at 22.5 knots, almost top speed. Captain Smith was under pressure from the White Star Line's managing director, J. Bruce Ismay, to make headlines by arriving in New York a day early. They were pushing the ship, and pushing her hard, through a known ice field. The story of the lookouts not having binoculars is famous, but let's dig deeper. The binoculars were locked in a cabinet, and the key was on board. It was on the person of David Blair, a second officer, who was replaced at the last minute. He walked off the ship with the key in his pocket. That tiny, insignificant mistake, a key in the wrong pocket, meant that Frederick Fleet, the lookout in the crow's nest, had only his eyes to rely on. And on a moonless night, with the sea as flat as glass, there was no breaking water at the base of the iceberg to give it away. It was just a dark shape in a dark world. At 11:40 p.m., Fleet saw that dark shape. He rang the bell 3 times and picked up the phone to the bridge. "Iceberg, right ahead." The first officer, William Murdoch, acted instantly. He ordered hard a starboard, trying to swing the ship to port, away from the berg, and he ordered the engines reversed. It was a good, instinctive maneuver, but it may have been the wrong one. Here's an untold part of the story. If Murdoch had simply turned the ship without reversing the engines, she might have missed the berg entirely. By reversing, he reduced the effectiveness of the rudder. The Titanic turned, but not fast enough. She scraped the iceberg, a seemingly gentle kiss along her starboard side. But that iceberg was harder than steel. It acted like a giant can opener, popping rivets and buckling plates along a 300-foot gash. It wasn't a gaping hole, as many imagine. It was a series of thin, open seams. Water began pouring in not as a torrent, but at an astonishing rate of 7 tons per second. Below decks, in the mailroom, postal clerks were desperately trying to drag the mail bags to higher ground. In the boiler rooms, firemen were soaked with jets of freezing water. They knew instantly it was bad. And then came the moment of decision. Thomas Andrews, the ship's builder, did a quick damage assessment. What he saw made his blood run cold. 5 compartments were flooded. The ship was designed to float with 4. The bulkheads, the watertight walls, only went up a few decks. Once the water filled one compartment, it would spill over the top into the next, like water filling an ice cube tray. It was a death sentence. He told Captain Smith, "The ship will founder. You have about 2 hours." What happened next is the core of the tragedy. The crew began loading the lifeboats, but under the most inhumane orders of the sea. Women and children first. But it wasn't just chivalry, it was a calculation. The officers were terrified of a panic. If they could get the women and children off first, they could maintain order. The result was a catastrophe within a catastrophe. The first lifeboat launched, Lifeboat 7, with only 24 people on board. It could hold 65. The passengers simply didn't believe the ship could sink. They were safer on the unsinkable Titanic than in a flimsy little boat in the freezing black ocean. They refused to get in, so the boats went away half full. This happened again and again. Lifeboat 6 with only 28, Lifeboat 5 with 41. While over 1,500 people would soon be fighting for their lives in the water, over 500 empty seats bobbed away into the darkness. This brings us to the stories of the individuals, the untold stories. We all know about the band playing "Nearer My God to Thee," but what about the other heroes? There was a passenger named Jack Taylor. He was just 17 years old, a young man from a wealthy Philadelphia family. He was traveling with his parents. As the ship went down, he and a man he just met, Milton Long, decided to jump. They shook hands, said goodbye, and leapt into the icy water. Jack Taylor went over the side, pushing away from the ship. He went down, down into the freezing depths. When he fought his way back to the surface, the ship was gone, and the sea was filled with a sound he would never forget. He described it later as the high-pitched hum of locusts on a summer night in Pennsylvania. But it wasn't locusts. It was the death cries of 1,500 people freezing to death in their lifebelts. Jack Taylor was only one of a handful of people to survive that jump into the water. He managed to swim to an overturned collapsible boat and clung to it until rescue. He survived, but the sound haunted him forever. And then there is the story of Ida and Isidore Strauss. Isidore was trying to get his wife Ida into a lifeboat, but she refused to leave him. Her famous last words, spoken to him on that slanting deck, were, "We have been living together for many years. Where you go, I go." Witnesses saw them sitting together on deck chairs, in their furs, a picture of calm devotion as the ship sank beneath them. And in the smoking room, Benjamin Guggenheim and his valet changed into their finest evening wear. His message to the world was, "We are dressed in our best and are prepared to go down like gentlemen." The stories of courage are endless. The ship's electricians stayed at their posts, keeping the lights on until the very last moment, giving the ship a semblance of life as it died. The Marconi wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, stayed at their key, sending out desperate CQD and then the new SOS signal, begging for help, even as the water lapped at their feet. Their signals were heard by the RMS Carpathia, 58 miles away, which immediately turned and raced at full speed towards the sinking liner.
At 2:17 a.m., the lights flickered one last time and went out. The Titanic was plunged into darkness. The forward deck was underwater, and the stern, filled with air, rose higher and higher out of the ocean. The strain on the hull was too much. With a roar of tearing metal, the Titanic broke in two between the third and fourth funnels. The bow section plunged towards the bottom. The stern, for a moment, righted itself before filling with water and spiraling down after it. At 2:20 a.m., just 2 hours and 40 minutes after hitting the iceberg, the surface of the North Atlantic was calm again. The only signs of the great ship were scattered debris and the cries of the dying. The Carpathia arrived around 4 a.m. By dawn, they had pulled the 710 survivors from the lifeboats. Among them was Molly Brown, who helped row her boat for hours and then organized the survivors on the Carpathia. The ship turned back to New York, carrying the living and the weight of the world's grief. But the story doesn't end there. The aftermath is just as important. The world was in shock. The initial newspaper reports, based on garbled wireless messages, said everyone was safe. Imagine the horror when it became clear that over 1,500 were lost. In the United States, a Senate investigation was launched immediately, led by Senator William Alden Smith. In London, the British Board of Trade held its own inquiry. The investigations were brutal. They exposed the lack of lifeboats, the high-speed run through the ice field, and the failure to heed ice warnings. They revealed that the Californian, a ship just 10 miles away, had its wireless operator asleep and didn't see the distress rockets. The entire maritime industry was put on trial. The Titanic became a catalyst for change. The disaster led to the creation of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLS, in 1914. The rules were rewritten. Ships now had to have enough lifeboats for everyone on board. 24-hour wireless watches became mandatory. Ice patrols were established to monitor icebergs. The Titanic's sacrifice, in a way, made the seas safer for everyone who followed. And what of the survivors? They carried the scars forever. Jack Thayer, the young man who survived the freezing water, went on to live a full life. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, had a family, and served in World War I, but he never forgot. He wrote a private account of the sinking for his family, a harrowing document. The memory of that night and the loss of his father never left him. During World War II, his son, a bomber pilot, was shot down and killed. The news broke him.
On September 20th, 1945, Jack Thayer was found dead in his car in Philadelphia, his throat and wrists cut. He took his own life, finally finding peace from the demons that had haunted him since that cold April night. And what of the ship herself? For 73 years, she lay undisturbed, 2.5 miles down, in total darkness. Her exact location was a mystery. Families of the victims dreamed of raising her. Treasure hunters plotted to find her. Then, in 1985, a joint American-French expedition led by oceanographer Robert Ballard set out on a secret mission. They had a new piece of technology, a deep-sea robotic vehicle named Argo. On September 1st, 1985, as the Argo's cameras scanned the abyssal plain, an image appeared on the monitors aboard the research vessel Nor. First, a strange, angular shape, then a boiler, then the unmistakable silhouette of a massive ship, broken in two, resting silently on the ocean floor. They had found the Titanic. What they saw confirmed one of the great mysteries. The ship had indeed broken in two. The bow was remarkably intact, still recognizable, still majestic, but the stern was a twisted mess of metal, a testament to the violence of its descent. And scattered across 2 square miles of seabed were the personal effects of the passengers: champagne bottles with corks still in, porcelain dolls, leather bags, and thousands of shoes. The shoes are the most poignant. The organic matter, the people, have long since vanished, but their shoes, made of leather and rubber, remain, lined up on the ocean floor as if waiting for their owners to return. They are the only human remains we will ever see from the Titanic. Today, the Titanic is slowly being consumed by the ocean. Bacteria are eating away at its iron hull, creating rusticles that hang from the ship like icicles. In a few decades, the bow may collapse, and the Titanic will become just another part of the seabed. But its story will never die. The Titanic is not just a shipwreck. It is a mirror. In it, we see our own arrogance, our belief that we can master nature. We see our own social divisions, the chasm between the rich in the lifeboats and the poor in the steerage. And we see our own humanity in the selfless courage of the band playing on, in the devotion of the Strausses, in the desperate struggle of a 17-year-old boy to survive the night. The next time you look up at the stars on a clear, cold night, think of them. Think of Jack Thayer and his locusts. Think of the band playing "Nearer, My God, to Thee." Think of the thousands of shoes on the ocean floor. The Titanic sank over a century ago, but its souls are still with us, whispering their untold story from the deep, reminding us of the fragility of our ambition, the strength of our spirit, and the price we pay when we forget that the unthinkable is always, always possible.